Welcome to Elephant in the Room, a podcast featuring real conversations with real therapists on the elephant in every room, trauma. With this show, we are aiming to share insights from professional practitioners on trauma, its impacts, as well as various modalities and resources on healing for survivors. This podcast is produced by the Breaking Free Foundation, a Canadian registered charity that supports trauma survivors in reclaiming their lives and finding healing. All of the therapists interviewed on this podcast are members of the Breaking Free Foundation Trauma Practitioner Network. My name is Amber Craig. I am a trauma survivor, one of the co-founders of the Breaking Free Foundation, and the proud host of this podcast. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Kristi Skye McLeod. Kristi is an intuitive practitioner and regulation expert at her practice of Soma Sky Wellness. Kristi specializes in helping people become emotionally, energetically, and somatically regulated. Please welcome to the podcast, Kristi.
Yay! Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I always start with really short intros because I want the guests to be able to speak more to their experience. So please give us a bit of your background and what you specialize in.
Yes. So I am a multidisciplinary healer. I'm a SIT licensed facilitator and public speaker, and I really do work with the foundation of nervous system regulation. From there, we get into trauma resolution and really getting to the root of what is causing nervous system dysregulation, but really allowing clients' nervous systems to lead the way. So this is something that I really focus on and is very, very important in my work, is that, this work takes time and it's a journey. And so allowing folks to take the time that they require, but also, like I say, within that, we are doing trauma resolution work with SIT. We're getting to the root of what's actually causing symptoms, these kinds of things.
So I want to focus a lot of time on SIT because you're the only practitioner that I've met who works with this. And SIT stands for Subconscious Imprinting Technique. Can you explain in detail what this is?
Yes, I would love to. So SIT is a multi-step process that uncovers and resolves the root of symptoms. Most simply put, to get into more detail, like a lot of folks will come to me after they've seen, chiropractor, massage, acupuncturist, Western medicine doctors, all of these kinds of things, and not finding long-term results. So they're kind of at the point that they're like, what is wrong with me? Like nothing is lasting, nothing is solving this issue. And so with SIT, we chat about that, and then I actually pull up the root, age and emotions, a few other things that have been stored in the body. This is often the, repressed emotions, unresolved trauma, memories, these kinds of things that are then leading to the symptoms. And from there, we use a series of statements, actually repeated after me, to release and restore the subconscious mind.
That's very interesting. So can you, for people that would be experiencing this for the first time, walk us through what a session might look like from start to finish?
Okay, so basically you'd come in, I'd ask you what you want to focus on, and this could literally be anything. Like, this is the beauty of SIT, is that we can focus on chronic pain, we can focus on anxiety, we can focus on depression, we could focus on like a behavior that's undesirable, a habit, whatever it is that's most present. I'm going to ask you how it's showing up for you, how it's impacting day to day, what are you not doing because of it? Just really like what has been happening within your life? How is this impacting your life? And from there, we actually shift to, okay, what do you want instead? Like, what is possible when this is no longer a thing? And it's interesting because this is actually usually the hardest part for a lot of folks, because they're like, I've lived so long with this damn thing. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what's possible. And so this is where, again, like I'll ask more questions of, if you didn't have this pain, what would you be doing instead? Would you be going for hikes? Would you be working out? Would you be like, whatever it might be? If you didn't have anxiety, would you be going out to more social events, like these kinds of things? From there, I then do an intuitive process to pull up the root age, emotions, and a few other things that are stored in the body that are leading to these symptoms. I share the thing. So I'll say, hey, you know what? Tell me a little bit about what life was like for you when you were 7. And they'll share. And the beauty of sit, like this is the thing with sit, is that we don't need to go fully back into that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm pulling up emotions, right? So this emotional data is what the body needs to release. So if I pull up an age and someone's like, oh shit, no, I don't want to go back there. Like that is not,
Yeah.
that's all good. We don't have to. And this is the beauty of working with sit, is that we can still, like, I work with a lot of dudes that are like, I don't know what I'm feeling. Like, I don't know what happened then or whatever, and we don't need to know. And so,
Mm.
like I say, we'll chat about that time a little bit, but like I'll poke for more details as I need them. But again, if people don't want to talk about it, cool, move on. And so from there, if we're in person, I would have them lay down on a massage table and repeat statements after me. So these are statements crafted, pardon me, from a framework throughout the sit framework. And I basically pull in from the sort of interview process in the beginning of what do you want to work on? What do you want instead? I pull in the client's language to create these statements, because we've all been programmed, right? We've all had things spoken over us. And so we need to release that programming and reprogram with our own words what we want instead. So I have folks repeat statements after me to clear away the sensory data and then reprogram the subconscious mind, again, also through statements of what it is that they want instead.
I know this is a really impossible question every time I ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Totally. Fun.
um, how many sessions typically would someone need? Like, just try to give people a picture of what this blueprint might look like if they're looking to do this kind of session.
Yes, you're correct. It's an impossible question to answer. I mean, to give you an idea, like I, for some folks, it might be a few sessions. For some, like, for example, I did a little while ago, a client came to me and was having was having like frequent bowel obstructions and like
Mm-hmm.
twisted bowels to the point that she would be hospitalized like multiple times per year and
Right.
has had many surgeries on this. We did one session and she hasn't had a surgery since, hasn't even had an episode since, like hasn't had an
Wow.
obstruction.
Wow.
So, and another one that had like really awful low back pain, couldn't stand, couldn't walk. She really enjoyed baking and cooking, but just couldn't stand in the kitchen long enough to do those things.
Right.
Couldn't like, go for walks with her kids, these kinds of things. Again, we did one session on that. She emailed me a few days later and was like, I went for a long walk with my family. I've been playing with my little boy. I was able to like stand and cook a meal in the kitchen. I loved it, so it can be one session. And
Wow.
often what happens is when people find resolution from something that like that person in both of those actually examples, this was years that they were
Right.
navigating these things, right? And so when they find resolution on something that quickly, they're like, what else can I work on? Right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so it can be as quickly as one session. Some things might take a few.
Okay. And you have mentioned a few types of symptoms that people might come to you for, but give us a big picture of what types of things sit works well on.
Oh my gosh, like anything. Anything. And I say this, and people are like, but what do you mean? And so, to kind of put this in perspective, like chronic pain, again, like I said, the surgeries, anxiety, depression, insomnia, fear, gut issues. Gosh, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs around like money issues too,
Mm.
and business owners around like removing the blocks and the programming about why they don't deserve to receive clients or like why they don't deserve to receive big amounts of money or these kinds of things. Um, Behavioral traits, patterns that might be showing up. Like a lot of folks will come in and be like, I keep attracting the same type of person. Like, why is this happening? And so we'll
Right.
chat about that. So it is really anything. And there are some folks that I wouldn't work with unless I knew for sure that they had support outside of the session. Like folks that are actively experiencing suicidal ideation or like active crisis scenarios, these kinds of things. I would be sure that they have other support outside of the session before I would work with some folks, but
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there was anyone that wouldn't be good for this type of work. So, on the flip side, what types of clients do you think are best suited to have success with SIT?
mm, yeah, I mean, I think this kind of comes down to with any of the work I do is that folks that are there will so what can often happen when it comes to something that the body has been holding for so long, it's so familiar, right? And even though it's
Mhm.
uncomfortable, like it's bringing us some sort of benefit, some sort of value, which can be hard to hear at times. So it comes down to after the session there will likely be some homework or just some even a statement to repeat or some things to be aware of, like, hey, if this pain shows up, then here's what you can do. So, folks that are going to be willing to take those next steps, folks that are going to be willing to maybe interrupt those thought patterns of this is always going to happen and these kinds of things, like, how can you interrupt that thought pattern when after you leave here? And,
Right,
once we talk about here's what I want instead, how can you actually take the action steps on those things that you want instead then? That kind
right.
of thing.
And is what's the duration of a session? Is it an hour or is it more than an hour?
I schedule 90 minutes
Okay,
just
yeah.
just to be sure. Like typically it is about 60 to 90 minutes. But I allow 90 minutes just because sometimes when we're in the statement portion, actually, some things can come up, of course, right? Or like some other memories can come up, these kinds of things. So I give a little bit of extra time and I let clients know to allow for 90 minutes so that we can like have the time to work through whatever might come up.
It's pretty amazing that somebody could, schedule 90 minutes into their day and potentially release something that they've been holding on to for
I,
years, right? So
yeah,
it's pretty worth it.
totally. Yeah.
Just kind of taking a step back into a macro level on this discussion, can you speak to how trauma impacts our nervous system?
Ooh, yes. So we as humans are not like we're not taught how to go through the whole cycle of trauma, right? If you think of a bird, it hits the window, it's going to like shake a little bit and it's going to fly away. But for humans, if we're, let's say, in a car accident or something happens, like the thing happens, and then we're not exactly taught how to complete that cycle. So the trauma, the sensory data then gets stored in the body, which then impacts what is like the nervous system's perception of danger, which in polyvagal theory is called neuroception. So this is beneath conscious awareness. So this is just how the nervous system perceives the world. And I use the word perceive, but like it's not conscious. So,
Mhm.
um, but once we have that stored data, that trauma in the body, then that can change our neuroception. And so things that might not be dangerous can feel dangerous to our system. And so what this does is that then our system is more often in a state of fight or flight or freeze, shut down, collapse, whatever it might be. And it can be hard to come out of that. And so when we're in that state for so long, this has just huge impacts on the body as a whole, but especially like on the nervous system when we're in states of dysregulation, this is often where the diagnosis of anxiety will come from. This is often where the diagnosis of depression will come from. So this is why I work so much with the nervous system as well as resolving the trauma, because to me, it's not so much the event itself, it's actually the impact on the nervous system.
How did you get into this type of healing work that you're doing right now?
Yes. Uh, my own my own healing, essentially. So I used to teach preschool actually years ago, and it was super fun. But I recognized more recently within the last few years that that was actually like a trauma response because I wanted to try and save kiddos so they never had to feel what I felt, and but I was not in a space to like I didn't have any idea of like navigating my own things. And anyway, so taught preschool for a number of years. And then for most of this life, I will say, I have felt a, like I felt completely worthless. And so I was diagnosed with a number of things, written some prescriptions, but even at my lowest point, I knew there must be something different. Like it cannot just be this fucking prescription. Like this is not, no way. I took the pills and I went on the roller coaster of trying all the different things and like was completely numbed out. And it wasn't doing anything, like it wasn't changing anything. So eventually I stopped taking the medication, but I was still self-medicating with alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, whatever else. And eventually it came to a point where I was like, I'm not actually going to be alive that much longer if I continue on this path. So I was in like a month-long panic attack, and one of my friends said, just try energy healing, just give it a try. So I did, and I finally felt a shift that I had never felt. Like I was learning a lot with talk therapy. And this is like, I will just make it very clear, like this is not every modality has its place. So I will make that very clear. I was learning a lot with talk therapy, but it wasn't actually shifting anything in my body. So stuff kept coming up, right? Um, then I was doing some energy healing, body talk in particular, and I noticed one day on my walk to work that I had this like glimmer of like, oh, something actually feels okay. I actually feel good. And it was that moment that I knew like my body was capable of this. I was actually capable of like feeling good, which sounds absurd. Some like it might sound, but I was just so used to just feeling like such garbage. So that's kind of what kept me going. And then over the years, like this is like 12 years ago that happened. So eventually I realized again, like, okay, nothing is like quite holding, like sticking for long periods of time. And then I started learning about polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve, nervous system regulation. And that's when all the pieces started clicking in. And I was like, oh, these are all the questions I was asking years ago when I was receiving all the prescriptions that nobody would answer for me. I was living in survival. My nervous system was completely dysregulated, and nobody was able to answer these questions. And so from there, I started doing that. And then I brought in subconscious imprinting technique, which is like getting to the actual root of the issue. So that's what got me here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just curious how you heard about SIT initially. How did that come into your periphery?
Yeah, I saw them on Instagram, I think, like maybe an ad on Instagram, or started following them. And actually I was just like totally creeping in the background for like 2 years. So
Right.
I heard of it and then was following them, but I was like, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And eventually, after I started bringing in nervous system regulation and bringing my system to a place of safety, then came the point where I was like, and we're in. And that's when I signed up. I hadn't even experienced a session when I signed up, actually. I just
Wow.
knew that like this
Yeah,
was the thing. Yeah.
that's amazing. What would you say is your favorite part of what you do?
Oh, wow. The possibility.
Mm,
Like, I think it's just leading by the example. Like I say, I share my story very openly because it is exactly why I do this work. And
right.
just to show people what's possible. And like, I didn't even think I'd fucking be alive this long, and here we are, right?
Hmm.
And So the possibility, seeing people actually get that glimmer of hope and be like, oh, it is possible for me. Like that is such a beautiful feeling. And I've had people say to me like often over the last little while, like I say, it's a journey, this nervous system regulation work, right? So I often work with people for like 3 or 6 months kind of thing.
Hmm.
And many people have said over the last little bit, like, you're changing my life. And that is, to me, sometimes I'm like, I'm just doing my thing, like
Yeah.
that's cool. But then to actually see people doing things differently because they've found that safety, they've resolved things that they've been holding for so long, like it is so huge. And I think that if we want to change the world, we need to start on an individual level and start by making people feel safer. And that's actually like a version of a quote from Dr. Stephen Porges. So I won't take credit for that, but we really do need to like start by making people feel safer. And so, yeah.
Um, just a question that just came to mind here is, you're I think it's great that you share your story of what you've done to get where you are, because I think it helps people understand that there are different types of healing practices that they can encounter. You've done some energy work, and you also do that in your practice. So I'm familiar with different types of energy healing, but a lot of people are nervous to get into that or try it. How do you create safety with a new client with something that you can't tangibly see? Like, how do you open the door for that conversation?
Yeah, totally. Even with sit, I find too, like I'm a Reiki master as well. It's not something that I do on its own anymore, but I do still use it within other sessions. Yeah, I explained it in a way of like, at the very least, you're going to just feel really relaxed when you leave.
Hmm.
And you don't really need to know what I'm doing. You can if you want. But I find that just creating the safety with that is going to be different for every person also. Um, but it's also asking the questions of like, what do you need to feel safer? Some people might not know that, but it might even be like, do you want a blanket on your lap? Or do you want to sit on the floor instead of on this chair? Or do you want to stay in the chair while we do sit statements instead of laying on the massage table? Or these
Right,
kinds of things. Like for some folks that I have worked with, they prefer to stay in the chair and put their back against the wall.
right.
Um, so it's just kind of creating the safety with whatever their system needs. And it also
Hmm.
comes down to like if someone comes in and if I can feel, because I really do feel what people are feeling, if I can feel that they're kind of activated, then right in that moment I'll say, hey, you know what, let's just stand up for a minute, do a little bit of movement, like whatever it might be that I'm feeling called to suggest in that moment. But I'll do it with them. So it's not
Yeah.
like I'm not like, hey, do this thing. So I kind of strayed off of your original question of energy work, but that's
No,
how I to like
yeah, I
create the
think that's
safety.
still really helpful.
Yeah.
I always ask everyone this question. Do you have any favorite resources on trauma that you like to recommend?
Mm. So for myself, again, it just comes down to really getting to know your nervous system. So, you know, if you understand your own system in a way, then you can like when those sensations and those cues from the trauma, the sensory data that is stored in the body, when they arise, then you can work with them in the moment. So I recommend, like, I've got a couple of books here that I'll show. So Our Polyvagal World is, oh, there we go. That's a really good one. Stephen Porges and Seth Porges. The Pocket Guide to Polyvagal Theory, also really good. Definitely recommend the Pocket Guide here because there
Yeah.
is one that looks similar that is Polyvagal Theory, and it's like a textbook. So it
Ah,
can get very wordy.
yes.
But this one is really, really great. So another thing is I have actually a nervous system toolkit. So you can
Mm.
find that at nervoussystemtoolkit.com. And that just guides you through getting to know your system and
Hmm.
what sort of tips and tricks can help in those moments when you start to notice, oh, my heart rate is increasing, or my breathing has changed, or I'm starting to sweat, my body temperature is changing, these kinds of things. What can you do in those moments?
That's excellent. Um, this has been a very insightful conversation. Like I mentioned, I haven't met anybody who works in SIT, so I think it's really interesting and informative. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners before we close out?
Mm. Yeah, I will share, one thing that often people ask me is, well, actually, I ask them, where do you want to be at the end of this 3 or 6 month container working together? And they say, I want to be calm all the time. And that is a myth. That's not going to happen. If it happened, you'd be dead. So
Right.
I just want to really clear that up, that
Yes.
we need our nervous system responses, but we just need to learn how to work with them and what they are, because then it doesn't seem as scary.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is a good message for everybody for sure. Thank you so much again for being on the podcast. For more information about Kristi and any of the topics we discussed, please see our show notes.
Thank you.
The Breaking Free Foundation offers therapy grants for trauma survivors in Alberta, and we also host 2 free support meetings a month. One is in person in Calgary, and one is online. For more information on trauma therapy and our organization, please visit us online at breakingfreefoundation.ca. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share. That's all for now. Stay well.